Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Glad you can join us today. John is taking a well-deserved break, so I will be doing the hosting duties myself. And in order to have some very good support, I'd like to bring in a couple of guys who are going to be very important to the program. We got Lindsay Brooke from Automotive Engineering, SAE's premier publication. Lindsay, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for having me.
Great. And Pete Bigelow of Automotive News, who knows more about things about mobility than most people that I know, and then some.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me, first and foremost, Gary. I hope I can live up to that lofty expectation you've set here.
Oh, I think you could do that in your sleep. And now the reason I have these guys who know a whole bunch about technology is because we have a very special guest here today, and I'd like to bring him in. Ken Morris, who's General Motors Vice President of Electric, Autonomous, and Fuel Cell Vehicle Programs. It's a hell of a title he got there.
Hi, guys. And yeah, I couldn't think of a way to make it any shorter. So
welcome to the show. Okay, so what I'd like to start out with is, give us a little background. Where'd you go to school? What'd you study? What did you think you were going to do when you get out of school? How did you come to have this job with a very long title and very important categories that you're working in?
Well, I actually graduated from Purdue University with a mechanical engineering degree, and I went to Purdue really thinking I was either going to be in the automotive industry or farm machinery industry. I grew up on a farm. So it didn't take very long for me to really realize that I loved the automotive industry, and I ended up co-oping at BorgWarner Automotive. At the time, they were making the T5 transmissions and transfer cases. So I was interfacing with Ford and General Motors and Chrysler, even as a co-op student. And I really was interested then in working for one of the OEMs. So fast forward, I hired into General Motors, and then the quick synopsis of my career is I've more or less been a total vehicle engineer, going through ride and handling, vehicle development, into bigger jobs where I ran all of vehicle integration and proving grounds, test labs, all of that together. And I've been a test driver, development driver since 1996. And so many trips to the Nürburgring and driving everything that we have in the company. And then that led me to, basically led me to here, where the total vehicle experience I have on the ICE side is something that I was able to apply to EVs, and I have grown to love EVs as much as the performance vehicles that we've spent time with. It's really, really a fun area.
People jealous when you're talking about driving at the Nürburgring. It's been quite an experience.
Yeah,
so Lindsay.
Well, let's get right into it. Big news the last couple of days, Ken, with new set of proposed emission standards, and I'm just wondering on the EV chunk of your responsibility to start out with. Does this dramatically accelerate, battery plans, propulsion system plans, and electric vehicle plans? Because it seems to have really accelerated just kind of the urgency of electric vehicles.
We've really had our foot on the throttle since 2018. So to have the kind of portfolio coming out that we do, we're going to launch 9 ground up electric vehicles this year alone. And that doesn't happen as a reaction to something, that was in the news yesterday. It's foresight and planning from our company's leadership and board of directors, and execution from what we're doing. And so it's good news for us because we're in a really good position. We've positioned the portfolio to be ready to be able to span what any customer would reasonably want, from an entry level vehicle all the way up to a super truck like the Hummer. And we're doing it. I mean, we're launching right now. We're on the verge of shipping the Hummer SUVs. We're already shipping Hummer pickups, Cadillac Lyrics, the Bright Drop Evo 600. Those are shipping to customers now. And by the end of the year, we will have been building and shipping the Chevrolet Blazer, Chevy Equinox, the Cadillac Celestiq, the Chevy pickups, and it's just a massive rollout of what we have.
What was what the government proposed? Was that kind of within your lines of thinking? Is this what you were expecting?
Well, we say we want a zero crash, zero emissions, zero congestion future, which kind of plays into a lot of what my team works on. And the zero emissions is something that we're expecting. We expect to get to zero emissions at some point, and our company really plans to do that by mid-decade next in the 30s. But the aggressive regulatory environment is not anything that we didn't expect. You see it now in Europe and China, and going to see it here, and you're seeing it here. So I think we're ahead of that.
In terms of thinking about all these new models that are forthcoming this year and EVs reaching this inflection point and scaling over the next decade, how do you think about the battery sourcing and the material sourcing that's needed to make that a reality? Is that in place right now for what you envision 10 years out, or does that still feel tenuous?
Well, for us, first of all, for our cell plants, we've partnered with LG, and we're building our own cells and the raw material chain that goes through. Our purchasing team has been working and securing those supply chains and locking in what we need for the future. And so, again, the foresight of what we thought would come. When I started this job in 2019, I think the projection was by the end of the 2020s, there would be around 15% of EVs and hybrids. And we made a bet that was going to be wrong. And, as all projections are, it's wrong one way or the other. But, when you see what the percentage of people that reply and say they would buy an EV right now has changed dramatically since 2019. And so we bet that was going to be the reaction when people actually got to really start experiencing electric vehicles. And it sure seems like it's coming true.
So Ken, let me ask you something. So you guys have the Ultium battery, the Ultium platform, the Ultium propulsion systems. Give us a breakdown of what these things are for people who are not familiar with them.
So Ultium really is our entire propulsion system, and it starts with, the obvious thing is what we call the battery. And so the battery really is made up of three elements for us. It's the cell, and the cells go into a module, which is a box. And then those boxes go into basically an enclosure, and that's the pack. So the pack with all the three of those elements in it are the battery, as you think. But then also we have drive units, and the drive units you can almost think of as the engine, but it's, the combination of an engine and transmission. So that's what actually propels the vehicle. And then on top of the pack and the drive units, then there are the power electronics that control all of it. And so we kind of draw a circle around those elements of the vehicle and call that Ultium.
So what I wonder is okay, given that, it seems the General Motors approach to developing electric vehicles is, okay, rather than taking something we already have and sticking batteries and motors and other associated electronics into it, we're gonna develop this from the ground up. What difference does that make?
It's massive difference in terms of the fundamental efficiency of the vehicle. What does the battery pack need to look like so that you can make the vehicle look like you want it to look. That seems like a small deal, but it's so capital intensive that you have to do it right to make sure that you can get the cross section of type of vehicles that we have. Like I said, from the Buick Equinox all the way up to a Hummer, we use the exact same module inside those vehicles. And so that takes a lot of planning in advance, and the flexibility of the Ultium platform, that's where it really pays dividends for us. We can make a portfolio of vehicles, and it also is vertically integrated. So we do, for the most part, we do our own drive units. We do the design and development of our packs and modules, and we're partners on the cells. So I do think that's an advantage. But at a vehicle level, the kind of benefits you get from being able to integrate the pack with the vehicle structure is massive. I mean, the ride and handling capability of our vehicles right now is just, I'm so proud. I cannot wait for people to get to experience the Cadillac Lyriq. Vehicles that are already out there, but I really can't wait for people to get to experience a car like the Cadillac Celestiq. It's just mind-boggling how good these vehicles are. But that is part of the reason why, when we know how to knit all those things together, and I'm proud of our company that we integrate vehicles very well. That's a big advantage to that. And I haven't even started talking about range and how the battery efficiency and range capability of the vehicles, and cooling and trailering and all those things. If you try to retrofit vehicles, you'll see degradation in a lot of those things.
Ken, you mentioned battery cell and then module. And could you explain kind of where GM is right now in chemistry and form factor? Have you frozen or established stability in where that's going? Because as you know, there's so much dynamism in the battery business today in terms of new chemistries. There's been a lot of talk of LFP. I visited a battery supplier last week who says we're eliminating the module. It's just cells in the pack. And we've talked to some companies that are going right, cell to vehicle basically, and kind of eliminating that. I don't even know if it's going to be a skateboard in the future, but all of this is happening very fast as you guys are ramping up for the big vehicle volume. What's happening with the battery right now?
Well, starting with the vehicles that we've talked about that are on the road, that's the Ultium platform is pouch cells in North America, and in our China vehicles, they're prismatic cans. So that kind of shows you the capability of Ultium, the flexibility that we have, that it's the same enclosure and it's the same vehicle, but we can use two form factors of cell in the vehicles. And then, I'm not going to get into explicit details about our future product. I love my job and I don't want to lose it. But I can tell you, we are always looking at ways to get more efficient, lighter, structurally better, improve range. And that is always going to include the form factor of the cell itself, the chemistry of the cell itself, and probably more importantly, and probably underappreciated, is the integration of the pack and everything inside it. And also the integration of the pack back to the body, like I talked about before. So anyone working in this industry right now has got to be having the time of their lives as an engineer, because the evolution of the product and the evolution of how we go about making the vehicles and the systems is changing very rapidly, like you mentioned. And I almost think about it like in the late 1800s or early 1900s, when cars were advancing quickly, and how even the ways they were built. We're learning things on how we put things together. We've been manufacturing cars for over 112 years, but you learn on a daily basis on how to make things more efficient to put together, and backfeeding that into our designs. It's all evolutionary right now.
And
revolutionary to begin with.
Do you expect battery chemistry, Ken, to be kind of on the critical path for the rest of this decade as new chemistries, because they take so long to validate, as you know? I mean, you can't just come up with one, prove it in the lab, and then put it into production. There's a ton of validation that takes years. So you have this battery development, and then you've got EV programs going out the door.
Yeah, and I think that's typical for any engineering endeavor. When as soon as you get something engineered, you see something that might have worked better. So you want to try, to improve the product. And I think that evolution is going to be not just through this decade, but I think it'll be 30 years. Just like think about the power density of internal combustion engines and the power per liter of engines where we are today versus where we were even in the 70s or 80s or 90s. You turn problem solvers loose on a problem, they're going to find a better way to do it every time.
Maybe a follow-up question along those lines of evolution of innovation, I guess, if that's the way to think about it. Like whether it's GM or your supply chain, like once that's all set up for a particular chemistry, even if something better comes along, is it harder to then go back and change the supply chain and everything to account for that? Is that an even further uphill to road for something new that comes along to climb?
Some changes are harder than others, and in general, we're trying to really maintain flexibility with our form factors so that we can apply a chemistry to the form factor that we have, because that makes it much easier. If you've got an integrated form factor inside the pack and you don't have to change the vehicle or the pack, then switching over to a chemistry, especially when you get to things like the calibration phase of the vehicle, that's much faster than it was for ICE vehicles, the drive quality and things like that. Manufacturing can be, depending on what kind of change it is in the chemistry, it can be kind of minor, or you have to build a new plant. So a lot of it is like, which path do you want to go down?
So help me understand this. If we think about cars up until now, OEMs did certain things and suppliers did other things. And it would almost seem to me that something like a battery, okay, so the battery inside this computer mouse is a Duracell, which is not made by Logitech. They sourced it out. So, most of the electronics that we all deal with on a regular basis, someone makes the battery and someone makes the device. Yet you're saying that it is very important for General Motors to be involved in this. Explain why that's the case.
I think because if everything was a D-cell battery, as an example, you can only fit what are AA's in these mouses or mice, and that means you have to design your device around that, and that's just not realistic for us to be handed something and then have to design a vehicle around that is optimized. And so it would be very difficult to get an industry to agree on what kind of size they want and what kind of energy density, integration, where do the power electronics go, where do the cooling lines be? It's all of those kind of things where, if you think about the complexity of a car battery, a real pack, you have liquid cooling, you have all the electronics that go through that. You've got we have a wireless battery management system that keeps an eye on the cells and the modules, and it's almost like a vehicle unto itself when you think about the level of complexity. And that's not something I'd be comfortable handing over to someone else. It's the heart of the vehicle, and just an engine is kind of the heart of the vehicle for ICE vehicles, and the soul of the vehicle is how it feels and drives and the performance. And if you just take something generic off the shelf and then you have to work around that, you're losing a lot of your control and equity in what the final product is.
So is the battery more important to the vehicle than a motor?
It's more integrated, in terms of torsional stiffness, the first beaming, all those things that make up the way a vehicle feels, it absolutely is more important because it's just more heavily integrated. And it's also, when you get into crash events and crash tests and side pole tests and offsets and all that, basically an engine you model and it's a chunk of mass. But with battery packs, we integrate it to absorb energy at a certain rate and certain offset, and it's super highly integrated.
Ken, where are we in terms of the elusive point where ICE and batteries cross and batteries become less expensive? We haven't talked about that for a while. And I'm wondering how this accelerated, push by the government and so forth, and really kind of more optimism from EV people in terms of more vehicles on the road. Where do we stand in terms of battery cost right now? And how quickly is that changing?
I love this question because it really is a nuanced question, because I think when people initially think of comparing ICE to battery or an EV cost, let's do ICE vehicle to EV cost, they think in terms of comparing a 4-cylinder vehicle to an EV. And in most cases, a 4-cylinder vehicle is going to go 0 to 60 in 9 or 10 seconds. And most EVs are doing it in 5 seconds. So you already have a kind of differential in terms of the value that you're getting for what you have in the vehicle. Then there's also the next thing where, when you buy a Corvette CO6, you're getting a supercharged, or in the case of the current CO6, it's a naturally aspirated flat plane crank V8. Compare that cost versus, a battery, and they're starting to get a lot closer than you think. But the easy answer is we're not there yet to be completely comparable with ICE costs. But to your point, the scale that the industry is getting, where the raw materials are coming from, and just so many companies and universities are working towards the cost reduction of cell chemistry and everything else that goes along with the EVs. I think that's we're on the way.
Well, I mean, put Corvette aside, I'm thinking of, you've got an electric Equinox coming out, and the current powertrain set that's in the ICE Equinox. I mean, you guys have that cost absolutely refined. You've really got an economical powertrain from a manufacturer's cost perspective. How long will it take to get that electric Equinox to that same kind of baseline?
Well, I think it's, even at an overall vehicle level, it takes time to, I mentioned the evolution and the how do you do things better and how do you do things more effective and cost effective. And so it'll take time, just because just the connectors that we use, something as simple as that, those will improve and get less costly over time, just like almost every other element of the vehicle. So, I'm not going to put a date on it, but we're on that glide path where we're going to get there. But I also think the Equinox that's on the road right now, we've had 50 years of evolution on that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Ken, I'm curious. So you have electric, autonomous, and fuel cells in your title. My impression in the industry right now is that electric has sucked all the oxygen out of the room for anything else. So just big picture, I'm wondering how you're spending your time, how the company is thinking about investing in these different buckets, and is electric the dominant thing to the, I don't want to say to the detriment of the other two, but is it sucking up all the time and financial resources right now?
Clearly, it's a big element of what we're working on, but I would say I spend my time about a third right now. Autonomous and our partners with Cruise in San Francisco, We're going into production with Cruise Origin this year. We've got the Cruise, the bolt-based Cruise, we call them A110s inside the company. They're running in San Francisco and, Austin, Texas, and I think there's Scottsdale. And so that's real. And I think people underestimate how real autonomous is, but that's a big part of our future and a big part of value that we hope to unlock for customers. And then for fuel cells, that's something I'll talk about the rest of the time if you want. We're spending a lot of time on fuel cells because I truly believe General Motors has an inherent advantage over other companies that we're doing our own battery system from the ground up. We're vertically integrated in our battery system, and we've been working on fuel cells for over 50 years. And so this year we'll launch our Gen 2 fuel cell system, and we're getting tremendous interest not only in the automotive world, which we've partnered with Honda, and they have vehicle applications coming. But we have deals, with Class 7, 8 trucks and airline companies. The uses for fuel cells are massive. And frankly, I guess I would describe it, and I'm sure the three of you know this, but maybe the listeners or watchers don't. The perfect case to use a fuel cell is like high load, which are things like heavy duty and medium duty trucks and over the road trucks and delivery vehicles and all the things that EVs are just not great for. You can adapt them, for small range, but if you're really going to pull a log truck, pull a load of logs, or you're going to pull whatever your cargo is, it's heavy cargo, and you're going through the Rocky Mountains, fuel cells are made for that. They're perfect for it. And, they have water coming out the tailpipe. So it's hard to beat that.
Now, Ken, a little bit smaller than a logging truck. How about a 3/4 ton or a 1 ton pickup truck? I'm a real fuel cell advocate, and I think that duty cycle is just so much better with a fuel cell than with a big battery. Have you guys kind of mocked up some stuff in, heavy duty pickups, fuel cells?
Well, I'm not here to announce future product, but I can tell you
from an engineering just exercise.
Well, we would be silly not to take advantage of what we have. We do have the fuel cell system and the Ultium battery system. Those two together make a heck of an overall propulsion system.
Very good.
But to get back to Pete's point, so you're not seeing a more attention being paid to electric vehicles because they're the ones that are going to be out there. They're the ones that are going to be in dealerships like right away versus, the Cruise vehicles. Yes, there'll be a number of them, but certainly not in the volumes that the Equinox and Blazer and so on will have. And, the fuel cell still seems to be more in the developmental phase than application.
Yeah, I think, if I were to answer the question in terms of where are the resources applied, like the number of engineers that are working on EVs compared to the number of engineers working on autonomous, clearly there are many more engineering teams working on EVs than there are working on autonomous vehicles. But my point was the importance of each one of those categories for our company are they're not exactly equal, but it's not like we're ignoring one because of the other two or whatnot. EVs are getting the majority of the attention from outside the company, the resources inside the company, just because of how many we're doing, the kind of launch assault that we're doing with our vehicles. There's a lot of attention inside the company.
Ken, right. So we're going to take a quick break here. Lindsay will come back. You'll have your question, and Ken will be ready. So we're going to hear from our friends at Bridgestone.
How do Bridgestone tires stop shorter on wet roads? It's their HydroTrack technology. But you don't have to know how the science works, just where the brake is. What really matters is they're Bridgestone.
And we're back. Lindsay.
Just curious what you guys have learned from Honda in this collaborative effort. A lot of the media has said, well, of course, Honda's learning everything from General Motors, but there's probably a lot to be learned from Honda. What can you think of that you guys have learned?
I would just say Honda's been a very good partner with us, and we're working along the way, as developing through our Gen 2 fuel cell system. We've learned together and worked together. In any development, there's always challenges, and I really am proud of both of our teams on how well we've worked together. I really wouldn't, say one way or the other who's learned what from each other, but in any technical endeavor with a bunch of engineers involved, I think it's been a really fun activity for both teams.
And it's been a pretty long relationship now. I remember when you guys inked the deal with Mark Royce, it seems like it was maybe a decade ago, right?
Yeah, I think it was around, and we'll correct the number if I'm wrong, but I thought it was in the mid 2000s and with Honda. And, we were doing fuel cells before that. And if you remember, we had the Project Driveway where we retrofitted Equinoxes with fuel cells, and we put out, I think, 100 Equinoxes around the country and let people experience it. So we've invested over $2.5 billion over the course of the last 50 years in fuel cells. So it's something that we've always, regardless of the ups and downs of the company or the economy or whatever, we've always been continuing to pursue that.
So maybe along the lines of the fuel cell front, and I'll preface this like Lindsay did by saying I'm an optimist. There seem to be big challenges with the infrastructure, with the vehicle supply, and with green hydrogen itself right now. I think green is actually a small percentage of what's available for hydrogen. So my question, I guess, is this all feels very embryonic still, despite the fact that there's been decades of research. So how do hydrogen fuel cells move beyond a phase one stage?
Two things I think are important. The first is the infrastructure and the availability of hydrogen. And the second thing is just the cost of the fuel cell system, which is coming down rapidly. We're working on a Gen 3, and that's, there are going to be cost advantages to that. But I think the place where we are right now, and the place I think through the end of the decade that can help jumpstart hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, is the kind of use cases we talked about, like the Amazons, the UPSs, all of the delivery companies, and then the fleet customers that have specific uses. If you think about not over the road, but around a hub, if they're going out and back to the same hub every day, they can invest in a hydrogen infrastructure, and then they can refuel those overnight as they need to. Or, how fueling a fuel cell is fast. You can do it quickly and get on with it. So I think that use cases and all the customer experience that will come from that, and the ability to have a hub, can jumpstart it, and is much more near term than the infrastructure required to do over the road hydrogen fuel stations where gas stations are today. It's just, so that's why I think if it were cheaper to come up with that infrastructure around the country, that might be a different story. But I think that's probably the way it's going to develop, is my opinion.
So you must be optimistic, Ken, of this kind of regional hub scenario that the government is kind of put out there, and states can bid on it and so forth. It sounds pretty pragmatic.
Well, for fuel cells, for sure. Yeah. I mean the out and back in the same day, and that really plays for EVs as well. When they have their charge infrastructure out and back and charge overnight, and you can keep vehicles rolling depending on what your fleet size is. Cost of ownership is way down on EVs. So yeah, I think the that hub idea and model is going to really work out for a lot of people that need to use these kind of vehicles, because the heavy duty and medium duty trucks and different things like that, those are tools. Those are tools that people have to have.
So, but Ken, here's what I don't understand. The experience of a hydrogen vehicle is very much like that of a gasoline vehicle. You drive it about the same range. You go to a station. Shell has a very few, but they have a few stations where you fill it up with hydrogen. Takes about the same amount of time as gasoline, and then you're on your way. Versus electric vehicles, which, as you well know, I mean, even if it's a fast charge in 20 minutes, I mean, that's still 20 minutes. It's not the 5 that we're spending at gas stations right now. I don't understand why hydrogen isn't a bigger play for consumer vehicles.
Yeah, I do think it gets back to the cost. The cost of a fuel cell system is more than an EV system at the moment. And so that, coupled with the fact that you can't find those fueling stations everywhere that you want, it'll be much easier to find EV charging stations. And, one of the numbers that I quote is 92% of charging happens either at your home or your place of work. And so that means only 8% of the time are you really looking for somewhere to charge your vehicle. And so you will likely not be able to have a hydrogen fueling station at your home. And I'm not trying to talk down hydrogen at all. It's just the reality of the current ability to adopt that.
Where is the cost though in those systems? I'm thinking you've got a compressor motor, and you've got precious metal in that stack. But compared to a huge battery pack like you've got in Hummer EV, I would think that nice compact fuel cell system that Charlie Freese's guys have kind of really made super package efficient. I don't see a ton of cost in that.
Well, it's the entire system, because you've got to have not only the fuel cell stack, but the pressure vessels, which are obviously not cheap. But then you have
the tanks,
right?
Yeah.
And then you have to have a battery, so to really utilize the system properly. So it's just a combination of those. But again, for a purpose-built vehicle, like something that's going to haul, you just can't beat that combination.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, and you alluded to this before, like if the logging truck is the no-brainer for hydrogen fuel cells, and it seems like light duty is for battery electric, how should I think about the dividing line and where it is between those two things? And is it range? Is it ease of refueling or recharging? Like, where do you kind of start to see a gray area as to what applications belong with hydrogen or battery electric?
I simply think of it as heavy towing, like 20,000 pound towing and above. Like if you're towing around a 15-foot trailer, batteries are fine for that. Especially, we're really happy with where our trucks are right now. But when you get into, you have a dozer behind your heavy duty vehicle, that's a different condition.
So we're coming up toward the end here, and I do want to talk a little bit about the autonomous part. We talked about that briefly with what you're working with the folks out at Cruise, and I was somewhat surprised that General Motors made an announcement last year, and you were part of the announcement, that you're using Qualcomm's Snapdragon Ride platform, and it said that the Ultra Cruise for the Cadillac Celestiq is the size of 2 laptops put together. And it's just like, I never thought about that before. I mean, what the compute power needs to be for an, a level 2+ or 3, whatever we want to call it, system. Talk to us a little bit about what's involved in the hardware and the software in order to get autonomous vehicles. I think that people probably think it's much simpler than it is.
Yeah, there's very little simple about even an Ultra Cruise vehicle, and then our Ultra Cruise that we're going to be introducing on the Celestiq. Just for that, for example, I mean, we're using long-range cameras, long-range radar, short-range radar, LiDAR, GPS, and it's. I'll take a step back and tell you, in 2017 or 2018, if you'd asked me what's required for autonomous, I would have said vehicle to vehicle infrastructure and vehicle to infrastructure, V to I. And so I just didn't, I wasn't smart enough to know how could you possibly control vehicles without them communicating with each other. But the way it's evolved, and the smart people that do this, it's all sensing and reacting, and that's the kind of hardware that you need. And so what I mentioned is the sensing side, but the compute side is just as important. And you have this massive capability compute in your hardware system that can read all that and react. And so it would be awesome if people that had real interest in it could see what is involved, because and then you take the jump to a cruise origin. It is phenomenal what the compute, the sensing, everything about that vehicle is just incredible.
Yeah, Ken, I was going to ask you, I was out in San Francisco about a week ago and saw just visually just as many Cruise bolts on the street as I did the Jaguars that Waymo's running around. It seems like you guys are kind of neck and neck in terms of number of vehicles that are running out there. How does the setup in those bolts differ, as Gary mentioned, to what's coming in the Origin?
It's obviously the Origin is more evolved. I've used that word a lot, but it is. But a lot of what we've learned, or what Cruise has learned with the development time in the bolts, and now customer rides and the interfaces with the customer, and how they actually operate and how they can improve, that all transfers to the Origin. So if you think about the way even our safety systems have evolved, we went from cruise control, and then you've got lane keep assist, and all those type of things that ultimately you can integrate into Super Cruise, and the Super Cruise integrates into Ultra Cruise, and it gets better and better, and we start at a better starting point on each one of those. And that's kind of the way you can think about where the bolt-based cruise vehicles are, and then they evolve into the Cruise Origin. And so it's just the next step of capability.
Are you optimistic that level 4 is coming soon?
If you define what the bolt capability is and what the Cruise Origin's capability is, level 4, everyone has kind of their own definition of that. But I'm not optimistic. I know it is. It's going to be here.
Ken, I'm curious, between the driver assist features and systems that are within GM proper, and then I'll say the self-driving technology from Cruise, is there any crossover between training data or software that one is helping the other learn or utilize, or are those just kind of different animals?
No, there is a crossover, and some of the tools that we use and the data that we use, we're able to share.
So you must grimace in the morning when you look at the news and see that, and this happens, frequently in development, but that one of your cars, ran into a bus in San Francisco.
Yeah, and I think that is, it's always unfortunate, but there always is also a need to understand what happened and improve. And, if we made a mistake, take ownership of it, like Cruise has in that particular case with a bus. But also, if you think about the development of any type of vehicle, sooner or later something goes wrong, and you just have to react and make it better. So I think it's part of the maturity of that technology.
All right, so this will be your final question, Ken, and I'll make it an easy one for you. So you could conceivably just answer it with a single word, but I hope you do more. Is an absolute requirement that autonomous vehicles be electric vehicles?
It definitely is. It makes things easier on a large scale, easier. The compute systems that we talked about have enormous energy needs. And so having that amount of energy on board is a big enabler. And then all the other things that we can do with an EV that, in terms of controlling, not worrying about, throttle bodies and transmission shifts. And they're just, the complexity of the drive experience is much more linear on an electric vehicle than it is an ICE vehicle. So those are the two biggest things that come to mind to me, is why EVs are really well suited. I mean, also they're zero emissions, so that's zero congestion and zero collisions and zero emissions. It checks all three boxes.
All three boxes, indeed. So Ken Morris, Vice President, Electric, Autonomous, and Fuel Cell Vehicle Programs at General Motors. We want to thank you for appearing on the show today, and it's been very informative. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.
So, Lindsay, you started out by mentioning the EPA's big drop yesterday of 758 pages in a document. So what's your assessment?
Well, like I keep saying, there's about 1 billion vehicles in the world right now. And I think the US, North America production was about 15 million last year. Even if that really flips on the 60-30 or 70-30 ratio that the government's working on, it's still going to be probably hundreds of millions of vehicles with some sort of ICE power, probably mostly hybrids, built through 2040, 2045, and each of those vehicles has about 20 years of effective life in it. So I'm just very optimistic on whether we'll be able to turn this 1.5 degree thing around. I just don't see it. I don't see it with human nature at all. But clearly it's a move to shape the fleet. There's no question about this.
So Pete, do you think that this is? I mean, the government has put the carrot out there in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act. A carrot that is both for the OEMs who are going to get money for every battery they build and every pack they pack, and for the consumer with potential $7,500 off the MSRP,
and building the 500,000 chargers as well.
So it almost seems that the document yesterday is sort of the stick saying, hey, we're going to have some regulations here. Do you think this is going to work? I mean, much of the argument, as I read through part of that document, obviously I didn't read 758 pages, but I mean, it seemed to be saying, you know what, the car companies are doing it right now, and therefore we can do it.
I would agree with that assessment. I think that's spot on, and I will stipulate that I've also not read all 750 plus pages yet myself, but I do think that the carrot and stick analogy is the right one, that they've put a lot out there to incentivize purchase, to incentivize charging stations, to bring the supply chain to a domestic posture. And now it is a bit of a now here's the hand at your back to ensure that you go down that path.
I don't think there's ever been a time when vehicles, I mean, clearly we all know these EVs are unbelievable, and there's a lot going for them. They have a lot of attributes, but there's never been a time when there's just been so much kind of eye off of all the things people on their own buy cars for, exterior appearance, feature content, performance, etc. And it's down to kind of, what am I going to get for this if I trade in my old Silverado for an electric one? And with still no real guarantee that the early days of that are going to be really as good as they are driving the old one.
I think that's fair, but also something else to consider is, you do hear people grumbling about the government kind of forcing this, but in a way, I think that the horse is out of the barn because China went down this road a long time ago and Europe followed. So from from an OEM perspective, they're going to drag America along, probably whether consumers really embrace it or not, because that's they're multinational companies and they're building cars for the globe.
Yeah,
but to the point, Pete, of Europe following. We saw this recent vote that the EU had saying, well, you know what, post 2035, you can sell internal combustion engines as long as they run on e-fuel. Okay. And, everybody's up in arms like, oh, e-fuel's so expensive and there's so little of it and, so on and so forth. But basically the German automaker said, you know what, we're really good at making combustion engines. And we want to, we've spent a ton of money on the wherewithal to build combustion engines. Damn it, we're going to still build those things and we're going to do what it takes to make that happen. I just wonder, isn't it possible that, okay, let's put China aside because of the nature of their government is different than it is in Europe or in North America, that just as a political thing, someone says, you know what, this EV idea was good, but there's still a lot to be said for gasoline.
Well, yes, I think specifically, it was interesting that Toyota and Exxon started talking about their e-fuels partnership a little bit more in recent days. That timing maybe is not a coincidence. But in generally speaking, Toyota in particular probably has talked about kind of a kitchen sink approach where it's not just battery electric vehicles, it's fuel cell vehicles like we just talked about with Ken. And maybe it's some of these other e-fuel things going into the traditional internal combustion engine too. And I would be hesitant perhaps to bet everything on an all battery electric future for some of the reasons we've talked about. The charging infrastructure is fledgling at best. There's questions about range and reliability that it's just it's not far enough along to definitively answer. So I think there are legitimate questions that make hedging a bet pretty pragmatic.
Well, it's interesting, and I can pick on John because he's not here, but he was suggesting that when Sato took over at Toyota, that Akio was dragging his heels in terms of EVs, and that was all going to change. But then Sato basically came out and said, yes, we're gonna roll out with a whole bunch of EVs, but oh, by the way, we're going to continue with our hybrid program as well. So you see that Toyota continues to hedge its bets. You look at Hyundai. They've got fuel cell, they've got electric. They've got hybrids, they've got gasoline. Honda, you could say the same for them.
Particularly with their partnership with General Motors that we just talked about. But it's interesting. I really bucket General Motors, Hyundai, and Toyota together because they seem to be the companies that are thinking about transportation more so than just light duty automotive or automotive, because they are really exploring fuel cells and hydrogen for a lot of different applications. I don't know if Ken talked about it, but GM's doing stuff with locomotives, with airport tugs in the hydrogen realm. And you start to see a very broad vision that maybe not everybody has.
I would be remiss in having you guys online here and not putting out a shameless plug for an SAE Congress panel that I'm moderating next Thursday at 1 p.m. in Huntington Place, where we're talking about this very thing. How do we get to this low carbon future, with Mickey Bly from Stellantis, with Byung-Ho Lee from Hyundai, from forget the name of the gent from Toyota. So these are the companies with many, feet in many doors. And Terry Alger from Southwest Research Institute, who's a combustion and an electric propulsion expert. So, we're going to be talking about this, and one side of my mind kind of envisions a future fuel island that any of us would pull into, and it would have electric vehicle charging, a hydrogen pump, and maybe a synthetic fuels pump for the folks that want to still drive muscle cars and drive older vehicles, something like that. So
All
stop by
Lindsay, all right.
Huntington Place next week. And you'll
All right,
enjoy this.
your plug notwithstanding, I don't want to hear about your plug. What I want to hear about is okay. So do you think that there's going to be a basic switch thrown by about 2035? And yes, there will be a whole bunch of combustion engines still on the road because people keep their cars for a long time. But at that point, you go to your local dealership and you're only going to be able to buy an EV.
Well, yeah, I think this whole movement that that Ken kind of alluded to and Pete talked about was, this new realm of quote affordable EVs that the industry's been talking about. And so, forget about this $100,000 kind of wave that we've seen so far. So it's going to be the affordable vehicle. It's going to be neighbors talking to neighbors as they have already, and access to charging and cost of charging as well. So I really can't answer that, but I think you're right. I mean, at some point you're going to go to a dealer and that's all there's going to be available.
I think affordability is a key question that we haven't really addressed so far, because the average electric vehicle right now costs upwards of $62,000. It's $10,000 more than the average cost of an internal combustion car. So, I start to think about, I'm not sure what affordability is for either one of those particular numbers right now. But it's definitely, not to the EV advantage.
Right.
So
I mean, in a way, and you guys know, I mean, the way this was sold was you get rid of the exhaust system, you get rid of that transmission, you get rid of the rear axle. This thing becomes very simple and modular to build. You can build any top hat on it. It's a skateboard chassis. So our costs are going to go down. We have a lot less labor in this. You basically snap these things together in a way. So Pete, why wouldn't that come down from say 60 grand to, kind of like Ford did with the T, from $700 to less than $300? I mean, is that possible?
In some ways, yes. But on the flip side, I would say, I'm looking at the cost of lithium and some of these other very finite raw materials that go into the batteries. And all of a sudden there's this huge demand. And that I would worry is going to drive prices in the other direction right now.
I agree. And as we all went through as kids, kind of the oil embargo, we've got all sorts of geopolitical aspects of the minerals and so forth that go into not only EVs, but hydrogen fuel cell vehicles too.
Yeah, so I think that's obviously a big part. And we're seeing that with the, reshoring of the chip making industry as well. It's right. It's not just the batteries. It's anything that's over by China or Taiwan. There's a kind of a crash course to build them here in America.
Pete, what have your colleagues heard from? Sorry, guys, just real quickly. Heard from kind of the dealer side on how they're looking at this kind of tidal wave that's coming.
It's the $1 million question, or probably the $1 billion question, Lindsay. But I think there's a lot of uncertainty right now. I think it's kind of just better hold your breath and let's see what comes. But I don't know if anyone has a surefire strategy for looking at that right now. I think it's probably the question out there.
All right, so I want to ask both of you guys. I mean, the notion of the affordable EV. Okay, have you guys talked to any suppliers that are saying, "Hey, we've got a technology that is going to allow this to happen. We've got a means by which this can be achieved," or are they just basically sticking with what they're providing to the OEMs and selling these very expensive EVs?
I think some are hoping for the scale that we talked about with Ken, and basically just consolidating and all the things engineers do from generation 1 to generation 2 to take cost out, because we haven't gone through that cycle yet. We've got kind of bespoke vehicles like Hummer H1, Hummer EV, et cetera, that really don't have scale attached to them. So the battery guys, and as Pete said, I mean, just battery mineral sourcing is that cost might not come down. And all these mines, we haven't dug any of these mines yet in North America. They're still to come.
Well, Lindsay, I think it was you mentioned LFP when we were talking with Ken before. And I kind of feel like everybody's exploring these different chemistries that, you know, we don't know how they perform yet. There might be a little bit of a diminished performance actually, but if we know we can get the raw materials that are abundant that go into them, that's a practical question. That's why I liked what Ken was talking about with regard to, you know, how easy is it to switch from one to the other or not once you commit. You know, I think that's a key question for some of those reasons.
Yeah.
I just wonder, you know, Lindsay, you were talking about talking to neighbors and so on. So I have an NMC battery in my vehicle, and you have an LFP, and I talk about how wonderful mine is, and you're like, mine's not so good. I mean, it's just like, how's that going to work out for the third neighbor?
I see. It's a great point. I just wonder, you guys, whether neighbors are going to talk about cars the way we've talked about them the last couple generations. Like, how do you like that new inline turbo 6 in your BMW? Well, you know, I traded in a V8 for this. Are people going to say, I really like this LFP battery? I don't know.
I don't think so, but I do think you're onto something in the sense they are like you were talking about with the, you know, the fuel island with all the different options. Like, I do feel like we're at a point where the market is fragmenting and people are they're being forced to think about how they use energy, whether it's in the car or our utility bills changing because they're changing the way that they charge by time of day now. It's something I just got here in Southeast Michigan. So all of a sudden people are being forced to consider the way they use energy. And in the automotive future, I feel like that might be that you buy a car based more on its use case. Now it is more, you know, you tow your boat up north here in Michigan once a year. So you buy the F-150 that's going to get you there. And that's what you use all the time. But maybe in the future, you're more price sensitive and you rent that pickup truck once a year or twice a year to go there and back. And you're really more attentive to what your daily driver needs in terms of energy, whether that's, you know, a hybrid and you're stretching your gas mileage, your gasoline mileage, or, you know, you're pricing the size of the battery that you really need to get you where you go and back.
Yeah, I think one thing that's weird now is you guys have probably gotten these releases from various eco NGOs over the last few days. They're really dumping on Toyota as they did. They're really dumping on kind of anybody that's still kind of in at all in the hydrocarbon fuel ICE realm. And, you know, they're very powerful lobbying organizations and have political clout as well. And, you know, I read a piece the other day on carbon sequestration, which seems to have a lot of potential, technological potential. But the NGO guys think that it's just kind of a stall tactic for keeping EVs down in a way. And I think they feel the same way about hydrogen and fuel cells too. And, you know, so there are these political dynamics that are going on, and depending on who's kind of in legislature, this can be an issue.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me that it's focused on Toyota in particular. You know, they're really getting beat up, and I do think there's a lot to be said for thinking about, are we moving toward zero emissions, or are we moving toward electric vehicles? Like, directionally, those are the same, but if you think about it, that one's a means to an end, but the other is the end. So what's really the best solution to get you to that end?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I like this horses for courses, Pete, with, you know, I think before we had the electronic devices in our vehicle clusters that showed things like regen braking, which I'm like fixated on in my Maverick hybrid. I watch this brake coach all the freaking time, man. Did I achieve 100? Why did I only achieve 79 in that last braking? You know, how much energy do I have left? We didn't have that in cars in the past. And I think you're absolutely right about that people say, well, what do I really need here versus that pickup that I'm going to tow once or twice a year with?
All right, so I'll just put it. We're going to wrap this up, but I'll just put a challenge to both of you. Just go to, you know, your local Kroger, parking lot or a Costco and look at the vehicles there and then tell me about this model that people are suddenly going to say, you know what? I really need a city car because I don't need this giant vehicle that I have. I ain't gonna happen. But
yeah, no, I'm not saying like an A or B class car, because we know that doesn't work. But something that just is maybe more reasonable. I don't know.
So, so like a Fusion,
sensitive at some point, right? And that's the point where I feel like electric vehicles being more expensive, at least right now. At some point, the pocketbook it becomes that kitchen, dinner table conversation of this is an expense, and that expense is growing, and how do we manage that? And I think people are more conscious of that in terms of energy overall, because they have to be, not because they want the status quo to change per se.
No.
The only thing we can be sure of is all this stuff's going to get more expensive. That's what I tell my kids.
Yeah, which is not a good thing for anyone, except for the people who are selling these things at a higher price. All right. Lindsay, Brooke, Automotive Engineering, Pete Bigelow, Automotive News. I want to thank you both for being on the show, and hope you had some fun. I certainly did. So thank you.
Thanks for having us. It was a good conversation, guys.
Good.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey.
If you like this program and would like to learn more about the automotive industry, check out our website at autoline.tv or look for us on YouTube on the Autoline channel.